Yeah, let me poke a hole in that conspiracy theory real quick. The World Economic Forum is basically an excuse for rich people to do body shots. There's not a lot of planning there. It's really not very impressive from either an intellectual point of view or any sort of planning. It's just a party. As for what the sustainable population of the planet is, we could sustain our current population at a couple billion more. It's an old adage that it's not a food problem, it's a distribution problem, and there's some truth to that. But there's a lot of breakthroughs coming in technology, especially genomics, that are probably going to expand yields in places that can afford it. The problem is that the population can't afford it. Part of that whole population aging thing, because of Bretton Woods and globalization and industrialization, is that well, not all of us, but a lot of the world's population is now moving to mass retirement. In fact, on average, the baby boomers of the world retire in the fourth quarter of this year. So, we're like literally weeks away. And when they do that, they shift their money from stocks and bonds into more conservative investments, because if there's a currency or market crash, then they're destitute. They can never rebuild their nest egg. Well, that's the money that pays for technological advance and application. And without that, our technological pace of advancement slows dramatically. So we'll have a handful of places that can still play, and thank God the United States is one of them, and the U.S. is the world's largest food producer. So we can bring automation into agriculture and genomics, and that will massively expand our food capacity. But for most of the rest of the world, you're looking at a disruption in the input flows that allow them to maintain their agricultural production. And that's going to be catastrophic. That's going to kill a minimum of 1 billion people, maybe 2. But there is no plan here. This is simply the end result of globalization 80 years on. I hate to say it, but we were probably always going to have that particular future. Well, let me break that up. So number one, we get our Western Hemispheric semi-hermetically sealed system that goes its own way. So NAFTA is already the world's second largest manufacturing base. It's already the world's largest consumption base. That gets entrenched and enriched. And I think the future of North America and anyone they decide to kind of include in the inner circle is going to be pretty bright. Japan is a country that has managed to negotiate itself into the inner circle. At the height of Trump's power, Trump and the Japanese prime minister cut a deal that was humiliating for the Japanese, but that was seen in Japan as the price of joining the club that was important. And then within a month of Biden coming in, the Japanese showed up in the Oval Office, said, just so we're clear, this deal stands. We don't want to renegotiate it. And so if the Japanese can cut a deal with both sides of the American spectrum, when we're having a little bit of a political argument, that the Japanese are in it for the long haul. Australia is in it for the long haul. New Zealand is in it for the long haul. Britain, they've got to figure out Brexit. But once they do, I have no doubt that they're going to be kind of joining this Western Hemispheric club. Beyond that, yes, I think what you've said is a good sum up of where we're facing. If you are an advanced power that has a Navy that is capable of expeditionary operations, the question is whether or not you can access the sufficient inputs to make your system work. Now, for countries like France, agriculture is fine. Electricity is fine. Their weak point is oil. But they've got Libya and Algeria right there, which is enough for them and the cluster of countries immediately around them. So I see significant engagement by the French in that zone, and they kind of establish, I wouldn't call it an empire. One of the things that made the empires work is that the imperial countries were industrialized and the non-imperial countries, the colonies, were not. And so the force disconnect was huge, and they were able to lord over them. That's not the world now. It doesn't take an industrial base to have an AK-47. So it's going to be more of an association than a colonization. And that provides a lot more hope for some of the poorer sides. The United Kingdom will probably have to do this with Nigeria. The Germans, oh my God. I don't know what the Germans are going to do because there's just not enough anywhere close by. Normally, this has led the Germans into the Russian space. And based on how Russia looks like after the Ukraine war, maybe there's going to be something there. But I think a disassociation of the Russian system is more likely because, the German system is more likely because the Germans have among the world's worst demographies. So by the end of this decade, the industrial model was going to collapse anyway. And the energy disruptions from the Ukraine war means it's probably going to disrupt within the next 18 months. So we will probably live through the end of the German nation here, and that'll take a lot of other pieces with it. China does not have the reach. Its navy can really only function within about 500 miles of the coast, and they don't have the ability to reach the Middle East in the first place at scale. So if you can get things nearby, you're looking pretty good. So the Turks, the French, the Brits, the Japanese are kind of a special case. I think they're going to be all right. They're not going to be as strong as they have been. They're not going to be the manufacturing powers that they have been. They're going to have to supply a lot of things within their own house. So those differentiated supply chains that have given us rapid technological advancement, those go away. And that means lower incomes for a lot of the weaker members of those manufacturing supply chains. So Central Europe, I'm fairly concerned about. But for everybody else, you have to be able to basically invite someone to you who can make it. And the list of potential candidates there is short. Well, let's start with Iran. Iran is kind of a textbook case for a country that has the resource disease. They export crude and pistachios. Pistachios are literally their number 2 export. And they use it to import everything they need to make modern life possible. So if anything happens to the Persian Gulf, if anything happens to the Strait of Hormuz, if anything happens to the long tanker run from the Persian Gulf to the rest of the world, Iran's entire economic system collapses in a year. And I think that is exactly what's going to happen. So I am not concerned about Iran in an industrial power projection sense. I'm far more concerned about what the implications of what happens when a country of 80 million people can't import sufficient food and fertilizer to feed themselves. So like with China, I am far more concerned with Iranian weakness than strength. Turkey's very different. Turkey is self-sufficient for most of the things you need for modern life. The one thing it doesn't have is energy, but it borders countries that have it. And it's got a partner in Azerbaijan, which is not too far away. So I see the Turks having to establish, as you said, a neo-imperial system to make sure that that works. But honestly, they're already getting along really well with the Kurds of Iraq. So I don't think that's a very heavy carry for them. As for the nature of Erdogan, the president, yes, he is a bit of a jerk. And he is interested in kind of a regeneration of Ottoman power, which is both secular and religious. He's interested in both. And I would say a lot of people within Turkey see the world the same way. Remember that Turkey is not Western. It also is not Arabic. It is its own thing. Turkey is a fundamentally independent civilization, and they are very proud of that, and they should be. Moving forward, it also means they're going to be one of the few bastions of stability, but that means they're going to go doing it their own way. So the Eastern Mediterranean will basically become a Turkish lake. I expect the Israelis to buddy up as a junior alliance partner with the Turks because the Americans are nowhere to be seen. And how the two of them interface with Saudi Arabia will really determine the tenor of this region. And at the moment, the Saudis and the Israelis get along famously. So I can see this tripartite arrangement in the region where those three call the shots and everyone else is stomped on. It will take them 20 years to kind of set that up. But once that is done, the question is, where do they turn their attention to next? For the Turks, it would probably be to the northwest in the Balkans. So it really matters what happens to the EU.
You mean they're going to try to take back the Balkans? Is that what you're suggesting?
I don't think this is going to be an imperial expansion of old because we don't have the ten balance. And in a world where the Germans are no longer functioning, the EU in itself is going to be in severe danger. And if you're Bulgaria and Romania in that scenario, you look at Turkey doing just fine, and you're like, hey, you know what? We have food surpluses. Is that something you're interested in? I can see the basis for an association based on Turkey, just like the French will be doing it further west.
Okay.
I wouldn't rule it out. It's entirely possible this part of the world has a lot of history. But I don't think it has to go that way. In fact, if the Israelis and the Saudis and the Turks can prove to have a mutually beneficial relationship, I can totally see Sofia and Bucharest asking to join that association.